David Cutcliffe, in a recent interview, said that when he accepted an offer to coach at Tennessee, he accepted without even knowing what he was going to be paid. As everybody remembers, David Cutcliffe, who is famous for coaching Peyton Manning and then Eli Manning and then turning Duke into a winner, and a very, very, very highly respected coach in college football, one of the greatest coaches in college football, in my opinion. David Cutcliffe was first hired at Tennessee as an assistant in 1982. He was brought on by Phillip Fulmer. Look, criticized Phillip Fulmer in a lot of different ways. The one person that Phillip Fulmer scouted over everybody else and recognized his greatness, there are two. There is John Chavis. However you feel about him, John Chavis became a longtime respected defensive coordinator in the SEC. And there was David Cutcliffe. Those were former guys who he believed in when no one else did. Okay, John Chavis, when he promoted Chavis to defensive coordinator in 95, was highly criticized and then became a longtime defensive coordinator in the SEC. Phillip Fulmer was the one who pushed to hire David Cutcliffe as an assistant in 1982. And then in 83 to 88, he became the tight ends coach. In 89, he moved over to running backs coach. And Phillip Fulmer chose him to be the quarterbacks coach in 1990 and 1991. And then Fulmer decided to name him offensive coordinator in 1992 when he took over as interim head coach and then full-time head coach in 1993. And so Phillip Fulmer scouted and discovered David Cutcliffe. Cutcliffe was telling the story recently, and for everything he's well known for, he said on 102.5 The Game that he had developed a friendship with Fulmer when Fulmer was an assistant at Vanderbilt, believe it or not. Now, for those who don't remember, Phillip Fulmer was an assistant at Vanderbilt back in the 70s. Fulmer returned to Tennessee Fulmer played for Tennessee from 69 to 71. He then was a student assistant, but then he spent 5 years at Wichita. He was a student assistant from 72 to 73. He spent 5 years at Wichita State from 74 to 78. And then he went to Vanderbilt in 79. And that year, while he was at Vanderbilt, and then he returned to Tennessee in 1980 to work his way up from line coach to offensive coordinator to head coach. But the year 79, at that time, Cutcliffe, who's from Birmingham and went to the University of Alabama under Bear Bryant, was an assistant coach at that time he was an assistant coach at Banks High School in Alabama, ended up becoming a head coach in 1980 and 1981. So while Cutcliffe was an assistant at Banks High School in Alabama, which for those who don't know, that's in Birmingham, or that was in Birmingham, Phillip Fulmer was an assistant coach at Vanderbilt. And he said that Fulmer was recruiting and signed one of the kids that Cutcliffe was coaching out of Banks High School. Cutcliffe said, I was a head football coach doing exactly what I wanted to do because that's what saved my life at 15 was George White and his staff. And then he said, and then Fulmer went to Tennessee and called me and said that Coach Majors was going to come to an August practice. And he said that Fulmer and Majors went down to witness. So Cutcliffe was an assistant at Banks in 79, became the head coach in 1980. Fulmer and Majors, when Fulmer was at Tennessee in 1980, it was either 80 or 81, Fulmer and Majors went down to witness an August practice with Cutcliffe at Banks High School. And Fulmer was supposed to be there for 15 minutes and stayed the whole practice. Cutcliffe says, quote, I didn't talk to him because in that era, I was the offensive and defensive coordinator and the head coach. I had 4 assistants. That's how we ran it. And I didn't know what he wanted. So I called the team up and let them go. And then he came over and said, can I see you in your office a minute? I thought I was in trouble. And then he said, where'd you learn to coach like that? And I told him at Alabama how things were done. And I told him that my high school coach was exceptional. Cutcliffe added, quote, Coach Majors was a great practice coach. He was a great strategist of the game because he'd been a single wing tailback and a free safety. He called it a safety man, but he was calling things as a player. But he looked at me and said, that may be the best high school football practice I've ever seen. He said, I'm going to call you after the season and offer you a job. And I'm in my mind like, yeah, right. Tell me which player of mine you want. And sure enough, Phillip called me and said, Coach Majors wants to fly you up and talk to you about the job. So that's how I ended up at Tennessee. It was an interesting trip up. I was single. He offered me the job and I accepted it without ever asking him what he was going to pay me. And when I got my first check, I went to check with him. I said, excuse me, coach, what length is this for? He said, that's for a month. He said, it's not healthy for a young SEC assistant football coach to make too much money. So about 2 years later, we're in Miami recruiting and I met my wife-to-be and I knew I wanted to get married. And I said, coach, I hadn't thanked you properly. He said, for what? And I said, coach, I'm the healthiest assistant football coach in all of college football, but I don't need a raise. But that's how I ended up at Tennessee and very fortunate to develop the relationship with Coach Fulmer through those years and those other coaches that we worked with. So Fulmer found David Cutcliffe in his one season at Vanderbilt trying to recruit a player from Cutcliffe at Banks High School. And then Majors came and witnessed Cutcliffe coaching practice. Now, for those who don't know, Majors was famous for how he ran his practices, and he was very big and loved practice. That was his big thing. That's what he imprinted on Cutcliffe more than anything else. And if you know Cutcliffe, Cutcliffe once said he coaches because he loves practice. He specifically coached because he loved coaching practice. But this is a what the H, because Cutcliffe was hired not for his guru, not for him being a guru, but because of how he ran practices. Kind of interesting, right? What the H, brought to you by Rick Terry Jewelry Designs. They want to be your jeweler looking for affordable game day jewelry, a Tennessee tradition. RickTerryJewelry.com.
Having been in the jewelry industry for a long time in the Knoxville community, I saw a need for a jeweler, a real jeweler.
Our ability to do these designs has really been based on the customers bringing new things in and challenging us as a store. Our goal is not to tell anybody what they want. Our goal is to listen to what they want and then help them get there.
Schedule your consultation today to get your special someone the perfect custom gift just in time for the holidays.
So with that news about how David Cutcliffe ran practices, I'm going to put up a poll question and I'll let you guys pick, but it's going to be, what was David Cutcliffe's best attribute? Okay. And here are going to be the answers. QB guru, how he ran practices, ability to adapt to his personnel, ability to adapt offense to his personnel, or adapting offense to personnel, or, and our final one, character. So you guys go ahead and vote on that, and I want to know what you guys think. Because what was David Cutcliffe's best attribute? QB guru, how he ran practices, adapting offense to his personnel, or character? Now, a lot of you might say QB guru. I mean, what he did with Peyton Manning and Eli Manning stands out, but also what he did with Eric Ainge from 2005 to 2006 was absolutely incredible. But I'm going to go actually adapting offense to his personnel. Now, you have to have the talent to do this, but remember, Cutcliffe went from Heath Schuler running a multiple offense to Peyton Manning, pure pro style, to T. Martin running back to a multiple offense. Okay. He mixed things up at Duke a lot. He added the no huddle with Eric Ainge. The other thing he did that was very successful was he didn't just maximize quarterbacks. We just know the quarterbacks, but he maximized receivers too. One of the most notable things he did when he got back to Tennessee in 2006, he shortened the receiver rotation from 5-6 guys to 3 guys. He said, Robert Meacham's going to be our go-to guy. Jason Swain's our number 2. Brett Smith is our slot. It's just that. So that's another part. Cutcliffe's insistence on the little things in practice, though, and the fundamentals really, really stood out more than anything else in the intense way in which he ran practice. He said one time, I mean, he was very big where if he didn't think players believed in certain things he was doing, he would make them do a drill that would last 2 weeks and wouldn't even run practices anymore. He would just make them do drills for 2 weeks. He was very, very big on drills, making everything second nature. Cutcliffe, more than any other coach, focused on the little things where there weren't going to be little fundamental mistakes that happened on the offense. His character, I can't speak enough of. I think David Cutcliffe is one of the best people of all time. It has hurt him on the coaching ranks, though. I mean, we're talking about a guy who, again, he got fired from Ole Miss because he refused to scapegoat his staff, to his credit. And then Tennessee nixed the potential hire of him because he didn't want to leave certain staff members behind when he was leaving Duke. So taking that into account, I think Cutcliffe's character was his best attribute. And I think Johnny Majors and Phillip Fulmer saw that from him as much as they saw anything else. But his character was incredible. And so, yeah, Adam, you asked what do I know about Cutcliffe's practices? It was mainly just the way he focused on so many little things. He was a schematic coach, don't get me wrong. But Cutcliffe was very much he didn't fully flesh out certain schemes that he ran because he'd rather spend most of his time making sure basic fundamentals were down. And then he felt that if you had those fundamentals second nature, and if he had the talent, he could adapt whatever scheme he wanted to the personnel. And so you never saw him full out on a scheme when he did things. Like, for instance, when he installed the no huddle at Tennessee in 2007, he had tinkered with it and had experimented with it with the Saints for a couple of years. He had gone down there to study it for a minute when they had Drew Brees. He brings it in. He ushers in the no huddle offense at Tennessee, but it's not an exact no huddle because Eric Ainge is a lot of times looking at the sideline for what to call. and he ushered in the Wildcat too at that time. What you always saw with Cutcliffe was not a full-on commitment to offensive wrinkles, but just enough to adapt to his personnel and knowing that their little things were second nature, knowing they would be great with that. You got to give him credit for that. So I think David Cutcliffe's best attribute was the way he ran practices. But I think all these things were great. I mean, honestly, the only one that was bad was his character. And I don't mean that was bad. His character is amazing. He's got impeccable character. I'm saying his character hurt him in the coaching ranks because it did get him fired from Ole Miss. So that's kind of one of the intriguing things.